Well, welcome everyone to Moreland University's Moreland Meet webinar on project-based learning and student-led learning as a response to learning gaps. My name is Joey Pearson. I am honored to be the Professional Development Officer for Moreland University and to represent this fine faculty group that I have here today to embark on a fabulous discussion that I think will lead to some useful information to create really engaged and student-centered learning environments for our learners. I am excited for the discussion that we're going to have today, but before we do that, I'd like to welcome you officially to Moreland University, where our mission, as I will put into the chat space, is teaching teachers around the world to be resourceful problem solvers and tech-savvy educators through our online collaborative activity-based learning system designed for tomorrow's teachers in a dynamic and a diverse world. We do offer a number of programs that help us to meet our mission, including our flagship Teach Now Teacher Preparation Certificate Program, which is a 9-month pathway to completing the teacher preparation requirement to receive a teaching certificate in the United States. We also offer a variety of master's degrees in education, as well as a master's degree in educational leadership. And finally, as you are aware, because you're here, we offer professional development, both to individual teachers around the world and to schools and school districts. We work with districts to offer tailor-made professional development in alignment with who we are and what our mission is. Today, you have the opportunity to not only learn some beneficial best practices and strategies to create a more student-driven project-based learning environment, but also to do so by getting to know some of the fabulous instructors and faculty members that we have here at Moreland University. So I'm going to introduce each one of them. And as I say your name, instructors, if you could just unmute yourself so that you can get yourself to the top of everyone's screen and we can see you. I'm going to start with Dr. Robin Harwick. Robin, are you here?
I'm here, yes.
Well, Robin is an educator, a research scientist, and a writer, and has been a member of research teams for almost 20 years. She's worked extensively in direct service of students and of their families, and she's the founder of a fascinating democratic high school called the Pearl Remote Democratic High School, which is a radical school that empowers youth to take control of their education. So we are honored to have you, Robin, not only with us as a part of our faculty, but with us today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Darla, are you here?
Hello, everyone.
Darla has over 25 years of experience connecting the dots on the global education grid by infusing technology and innovating. She works particularly in virtual learning and is focused on facilitating and using empathetic listening to create authentic dialogue and high engagement between diverse learners. So thank you for being here, Darla. We also have one of our administrators here, one of two actually. Carrie, are you there?
Hi, everyone. I'm here.
Thanks for being with us, Carrie. She's been an instructor with Moreland for 4 years and recently joined our administrative team as the Director of Clinical Practice. She's an alum of the program and has more than 15 years of teaching experience in elementary dual language instruction. So we are thrilled to have you. It's great to have such a diverse group with us. Then Dr. Edward Johns, are you here?
I am here, Joey.
Well, welcome. Eddie is originally from Hilo, Hawaii, and earned his doctorate of education from the University of Southern California here near me in San Diego. USC is up in LA, right? Well, Eddie has worked for 10 years throughout Asia in particular. He served as the Director of Student Services at an international demonstration school and as a foreign teaching expert So we are thrilled to have him on the panel as well as an instructor here at Moreland. Last but definitely not least, we have Courtney Stoll.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Courtney has taught in the online secondary setting for more than 16 years and is a passionate educator who's passionate about designing student-led lessons, which is really important for us today, in an online classroom environment in particular. Having worked at Moreland for more than 5 years, she currently serves as an instructor and is our librarian. So we are super excited to have you with us today. Well, let's go ahead and dive into this webinar. We're here to uncover student-led responses to learning gaps, which is the focus of our professional development during the month of October. We want to sort of respond to the challenges of the gaps in student performance that have come about as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Concluding this month-long focus on responding to learning gaps as a result of COVID-19, this particular webinar offers educators around the world an opportunity to glean some technologically innovative and student-driven strategies so that we all can empower our students to make up for lost learning due to this toggle between online and in-person education. The guiding question for our webinar today is, how can educators tap into student interest, into passion, and into the goals that students have to develop projects that help close learning gaps? Those of you who are watching this webinar after the fact, I encourage you to pose your questions and comments in the commenting area on YouTube, where you will be able to respond, and then I will be sure to connect any questions with the experts on the panel after the fact. But we're going to start with student engagements and student-led learning as the first focus of our discussion. In the chat space, I've posed the question: how can teachers build authentic student engagement and active participation in student-driven project-based learning? Panelists, I ask you to please narrow your focus to either primary or secondary school settings as per your experience and expertise. Some key ideas that I want us to chat about today are student choice, technology enhancement, and innovative learning activities in hybrid environments. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and invite our panelists to chime in. And I'm going to actually do this thing where I say, Carrie, you are a fellow administrator, so you're going to have to go first.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joey. I'm ready. Well, I just came off of teaching for a year and a half in Zoom and in a hybrid setting in a Title I school in Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland. I was teaching kindergarten in a Spanish English two-way immersion program. So you can imagine that project-based learning was quite difficult. And that's one of the key areas that we focused on with my team as a way to create really authentic experiences for our linguistic and culturally diverse students. So some of the things that we did is ask questions. And now, it's more important than ever to create spaces for student discourse. So in the lower grades, particularly in kindergarten, asking questions is really important and get to know our students and then understand what their interests are. And then creating those peer-to-peer interactions and understanding where students are by, informing our instruction with data, so we know what their proficiency levels are. We know how to pair and group our students is really important. And then integrating content across the curriculum. When you work in a public school system, you're often given these third-party curriculums that that are very scripted, and that just doesn't meet the needs of our students, the students that are in front of us. And so adapting the curriculum to meet your students' needs is really important. And for project-based learning in particular, tapping into students' language domains is really important, because we all learn through the medium of language. So giving them opportunities to practice their listening, reading, speaking, writing making metalinguistic connections, tapping into their identities and their culture was really, really important. And then as far as technology is concerned, using technology as a differentiation tool in the lower grades is really important. Learning stations is one way to offer that space, allowing students to have a choice of different apps. I remember having a student where we had a grant for Dreambox, which is a math app, and the students were required at my school to use it every day, and he just hated it. He just did not want to do it. So we had to, find ways, different apps that could maybe meet the same goal, but that he was more interested in to help him learn those skills. And then later reintroduce Dreambox was a way that we differentiated for him. And we did things like that across the grade level. And then in terms of innovative learning spaces and learning activities, I think it's really important in the primary grades, whether you're in hybrid, Zoom, in person, you have to create predictable routines and include a lot of space for social emotional learning and building that class community. And one of the ways that I think was really critical for my grade the last year and a half was including art integration into everything. Because right now, students in primary grades really need that opportunity to build their fine motor skills. Writing is a big concern. And so being able to use art across all subjects is really powerful. And there's some great ways to do that using technology. There's this great site, I don't know if anybody's heard of it, called How to Draw. We use those for every single subject. You can find pretty much anything related to the subject you're teaching. And just for 5 minutes, 3 minutes, allow the students to draw as a way to process. And then document cameras and modeling are another really, really powerful way that you can engage young learners by putting them in gallery view and the modeling with a document camera, and you can really see what they're doing and help them with their pencil grip and writing and things like that. So those are some of the ways that I think can encourage learning and create spaces to, something larger like a project-based learning space.
Thank you, Carrie, for speaking from, in particular, the perspective of a primary education background. I know that that is a particularly interesting perspective given the need to provide such scaffolded support for younger learners as we are empowering them to become more autonomous agents of their own learning. And the use of arts integration and really the development of appropriate lines of inquiry and questioning that we can use to inspire them and respond to their needs is helpful in us in our determination of how to create these student-centered environments. But I'd like to shift over to Edward to talk a little bit about that secondary environment where I think, Eddie, you have more experience working in the secondary classroom than in the primary, if that is, if I understand correctly.
Yes. Yeah. Putting me on the spot, thanks. No, I'm just joking. So most of my professional career has been in Asia, and in terms of secondary, because they're at a another stage in their growth level, I have found, personally, that one of the most important things that you can do is sort of establish the relationship with the students. So like for me, some of the things that I've done is kind of like showing that you care about them, by, for example, talking with them, asking how their day is, but also, showing that you care with your work ethic almost. So like, for example, having really good planning in your lessons, asking students what they think about, their opinions, and then also, meeting with them one-on-one outside of the class if they need assistance, or even asking them what they're interested in learning, or to give them an option. I think that's one of the things that sort of helped me to sort of connect with students is really designing that sort of self-directed learning, giving them student choice into my lessons. But I think being honest and genuine with them. So for example, I've always found, we're teachers and we make mistakes. And I have always found that, by admitting the mistake, it didn't, break the bond between the teacher. It sort of made us even closer because, hey, we're all human. We all make errors and whatnot. So yeah, I'm kind of at a little bit of abrupt. I hope that's sort of concise and straight to the point in terms of what you were looking for.
Yes, I would like to piggyback onto that because I'm in secondary as well. And the notes that I had taken beforehand falls right in line with what Eddie was saying. I think with students in secondary, really having that relationship has to be top priority. So one of the things that's challenging for instructors and for my teachers that work at my school is I would say you have to slow down. You have to slow down and you have to be okay with taking things a little bit slower and getting to know your students. Because if you're going to be, if you're going to say you're student-centered, then you have to know who your students are. And that can't be just some kind of survey that's really generic that you give to everyone. You need to make sure you get to know them, because what we do is we really get to know our students' hopes, goals, and dreams. And for some students, they may hope that they get done. That may be where they're at. Like, I just want to graduate from high school. That's all the further I'm going to go with you as far as my goals. That's totally fine. So then we say, all right, well, then we know that that's your plan. How do we get that done? And in a way that is as interesting as possible for you. And so that again takes time. And then you have other students who want to be an architect or they want to go into social work and those kind of things. So, and when we know that, then we're thinking of their planning, we're thinking about their projects, and we look at how we can integrate their projects across subject areas. This means we also spend a lot of time as the teacher team talking to each other and saying, hey, Eddie, I heard in your class, you guys were studying this thing. I think that we can layer that math project that you're working on into social studies, because we're looking at population growth and those kind of things, and so we can combine that, and there's a math element there. And so what we really like to do is use the students' core interest and figure out how we can, and this is our role as the teacher, we tell the students, we just want to know what you're interested in, and then we'll help you figure out how does that, how can that be incorporated in math? How can it be incorporated in chemistry? How can it be incorporated in art? And because we do have concrete subject areas. And so although it seems like things are going slower in the beginning, and I think that's what I hear from teachers a lot, is they feel like they're just not moving forward fast enough when they're trying to do project-based learning, and they want to dive into it. But it's that that time spent up front really getting to know your students. Then it builds the intrinsic motivation, and when they get into their projects, that's when they really soar. But you have to be patient. And so I think a key aspect of that is we make sure we're in lots of communication with the parents, because the parents, especially if they've been coming from a traditional school and they're used to seeing lots of worksheets and lots of stuff coming home, and the parents are like, what's going on? And so you have to be talking to the parents about the process and why you're doing what you're doing. And then we always back it up with the research behind what we're doing, so the parents can say, okay, I trust you all. I know that you have this, and we're going to stand by and watch. But what we have noticed during the pandemic is by really focusing on those relationships, having students be connected with their work and culturally relevant comes into it, because you're finding out what's interesting to your students. So it's not a side note as far as, is what you're doing culturally relevant, because they're, bringing in aspects of their culture or wanting to know more. For instance, I have a student who is researching their Indigenous history right now, and as part of our Native American history class. So it becomes really relevant to them when they're really guiding the conversation. And then the other aspect I'll say is that as a teacher, you have to be flexible. And sometimes you will try something out, like Eddie was saying, and it flops, and it flops bad. So this is where you're like, so you all said that you wanted me to select an activity for Thursday, and so I did, and you didn't like it, did you? And they say, no, it was terrible. It really wasn't that fun. It was super boring. But that is your door opener to say, well, what do you think we could have done instead? What would have been more interesting? How can, you share your ideas about how I designed this that was so boring, what could I do instead? And then that's how you get them to start leading. So when they throw you the ball, you take it. And if it flops, it's not a bad thing, because oftentimes then they'll say, oh, could we do this instead next time? Because that was horrible. Like, sure, let's do that. So I'll leave it at that for now.
So much to take away from that. And I want to focus on two specific things that I heard. And then I'd like to invite either Courtney and or Darla to respond. Number one, helping to build those relationships using strategies along the lines of really facilitating sort of get to know you activities in ways that feels authentic. I know you said, Robin, that a survey isn't going to necessarily be the best way to do that. But one of the questions that I want to sort of pose is, logistically, at the start of the year, when we're getting to know our students, how do we go about that? You said, Robin, that we need to get to know students' hopes, goals, and dreams. And that really resonated with me. I'd like to pose to this panel, what are some ways that you get to know students' hopes, goals, and dreams, number one? And then number two, and I think this is really going to connect to Courtney, how do we connect students with the right resources? How do we act as sort of curators of resources and content and activities and tools to empower them to then achieve their goals and to reach their dreams? So Darla, if you'd like to jump in there, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I just love hearing what everybody has to say, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think I'm going to take a more general approach. I think to me, the word authentic is where it all starts. And those relationships that we build, that authenticity, the use of those guided questions, that's where the engagement comes in for me, as well as the listening. I know that a couple of my colleagues mentioned slowing down, listening to their responses, really listening to what they're saying. One of the questions I ask my students all the time, Joey, in response to your question, is I ask them, how do you learn? What works best for you? How do you learn best? Is it, tell me what you like to learn? Yes, give them that choice, but how do they like to learn? And they love learning for the sake of learning, and then immersing them in that as much as I can through the content that I teach, making that connection. I think it's also important to incorporate those 21st century learning skills to initiate that higher level thinking, and that does immerse it in their community or connect them with students on the other side of the globe. That interaction and making it part of their world right now is going to drive that interest. Telling stories, there's so many tools out there post-COVID. We could talk about that, but they're out there. There's one of the websites I use quite a bit is called the Global Oneness Project. It has lesson plans already built. edX, there's so many great resources out there for whatever subject. Cross-curricular projects with teachers, yes, but cross-curricular subject projects with kids too around the globe. And I think just being not once a year, not at the beginning of the year, but keeping a pulse on that and mixing it up, being ready to pivot if you have to, being ready to change if things don't work, like Dr. Hartwood said, just make it fun. Like Dr. John said, if we make a mistake, we say, oh, well, that's how we learn, and to mirror those type of life skills, I guess. And I'll turn it over to Courtney because she's got something to say too.
You guys hit so many great points. Thank you. So I am coming at it from the secondary perspective as well. I've taught grades 7 through 12 English to native speakers and social studies, and then my time here at Moreland and in the library role. So in the cyber setting or the online setting, and that was even pre-COVID, one of the things that my school does, and I would want to carry with me, throughout my career, would be something called a personalized learning plan. And that is really an opportunity to get to know the student, how they learn best, we're not just talking about what we used to hear with, kinesthetic or visual or auditory, but, how do they like their lessons delivered? What don't they like? So that discussion, what they want to do, whether it be like what their goals are for the year, if they want to improve their grade, or if they want to get a job. That's important to note. If they want to excel in a sport, some students like to talk about what they want to do after high school, some don't. So follow their lead. So that's a nice discussion. And then we make it a point to, in the online setting, to have 5 successful phone calls a day with students and their caretakers and have those discussions. So much of what the panel here has said, I've had tremendous success with, because when it comes to project-based learning and that authentic learning, like, we really do need to know who our students are. And I love what some of you put in the chat space. That survey, I use the survey as a springboard to get those discussions. Most importantly, we look at the surveys and that we take notes. I have a spreadsheet and a column with notes. And when I have those conversations, those phone calls, or those email exchanges with a student or a caretaker, take notes. Did they have a swim meet? Are they interested in gaming? Do they enjoy horseback riding, or live on a farm, or in an urban area? Because all of that is part of their story. And then what I've found is have discussions with other content teachers in the secondary environment. Sometimes it's like you can have a social studies hallway and a math hallway. And when you have the opportunity, reach out to another teacher and say, what are you covering in your class? And have that opportunity to see if anything matches up. In speaking with English teachers and math teachers, we realize that there's some overlap. I know you're busy and time is valuable, but if you ever have the chance to reach out to other content teachers, see what they're covering. And if you can integrate that in any way, sometimes we find that some of the topics that they're learning in American literature overlap with what's happening in government. And we do a 2-for-1, and we allow them to bring in what they're learning in English to what they're learning in government. So opening those conversations, building that rapport. And as many of you had said, just as the different topics come up. So obviously you're aware of your state or your curriculum or your school standards, and you have to meet those. And within those standards, integrating their interest, reaching out to other teachers. In feedback, I'll also offer resources as well if they expressed interest at the secondary level about a certain career or a certain topic that they're passionate about. I'll kind of point them in the direction to get some information or to start that process. So thorough feedback and foster that. And I also take note of it too. The student is very interested in X, Y, and Z. And when it comes time for an assignment, as long as I know that they're going to show that they have met the state, I'm in Pennsylvania, so the state standards of Pennsylvania, allowing for some flexibility. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Courtney. Go ahead, Eddie.
Well, I was just going to sort of connect a little bit with what Courtney had said. One of the things that you had said, Courtney, was use I think sort of like or what everybody has said, use sort of the cultural elements. So one of the things that when I was working in China that was a little bit difficult is, of course, many things are everything is in Chinese, for example. And so, in terms of the internet, there's a lot of tools that we could use outside of China that we definitely can't use in China, and so part of the, the process of being a teacher is to try to, figure out what your resources are and figure out, what is the landscape in terms of cultural as well as, limitations with technology, et cetera. And so one of the things that I have found valuable is almost finding somebody who, almost like one of the things that I did is I connected with the Chinese teachers. Like I asked them what they thought, about, for example, what they would suggest. And, what are the pop culture things that students are interested in? And in a way, they're sort of like the cultural informant to, allow me as a foreigner in the country to be sort of more effective inside of the classroom. And, even if I, was teaching in the US per se, that's also a really great thing to do, is also consult with colleagues to get, different ideas and whatnot. But, once you have these ideas, one of the things is, connect that to the curriculum. Because sometimes I think students, they don't really realize that, all of the skills that we're training in class, I mean, these can be connected to, things you can't even, like you wouldn't even imagine. And like, for example, one of the examples I share in my class is, I got my master's degree in counseling psychology. And originally I was doing my master's thesis on adolescent aggression. And then, 2 months later and a 30-page literature review later, I realized I don't want to do this anymore. And then I tell my professor, he's like, well, you need to provide something. And I was like, oh, what am I interested in? And at that time, I had just, being a part of the LGBT community, I was like, well, in Hawaii, who takes care of the young gay kids? And it was the drag queens. So in 1 week, what I did is I, wrote a literature review and did like this master's thesis. And, at the beginning of the program, I didn't even think that I could do that. You know what I mean? I didn't think I could connect it to drag queens. And so part of telling the story to the students is getting them to think outside of their boxes and try to connect it. Like, for example, in China, there was, I had like middle school girl students, and they were crazy about these TF boys, which is just basically Backstreet Boys, or, the boy bands and whatnot. And, a part of finding out information from the teachers, finding out information about them, it's sort of, and then connecting it to, the curriculum. Like, for example, you can, connect vocabulary to describing the TF boys, or you can connect grammar structures to, to anything. And so that's one of the things that I've done. And then also, in terms of technology, if you are in China, part of it is getting to know what technology is available. And sometimes you just have to use your phone and take a picture of it and translate it, because that's the only way you're going to get through it. But if you, part of it is putting yourself at their level, but putting yourselves in their shoes so you can see through their eyes, and then taking that experience and then connecting it to the curriculum, because that's sort of the fun part about it. Yeah.
That's such a great example. I love what you were saying there. I had another example that was kind of similar, working with English language learners here in Mexico. And I had a student who was really, really reluctant to write. And he loved football, loved. And so he was always trying to talk to me about the game, and I don't know anything about the game. And so finally, when we were talking about this project, he said, can I write a paper on FIFA? I think that's what it's called. and I said, absolutely. But you got to remember, you have to write, you have to think of me as like a 5-year-old that knows nothing about the game. You can't make any assumptions about this game, because I will not know what you're talking about. So you have to explain, if you talk about the name of somebody on the team and their position, you have to explain all of that like I'm 5. And he wrote 16 pages for his final project with so much detail. And so when you're thinking about descriptive writing and thick descriptions and those kind of things, he totally got it. He was like, okay, she really knows nothing about this, so I have to define every aspect of it. And he just kept writing and writing. And it was amazing, because the difference in, when he grabbed me in the hall and be like, can you read the next page that I wrote, and he was so excited about it. And the same class, I had somebody else who also a English language learner, who did a critical analysis of a Pink Floyd record, and he incorporated like music theory and everything into this paper. And it just showed how these were the beginning of the school year. These kids didn't want to write anything. And by the end, when they got that I really, really did want to read what they were interested in, then they just wrote. And it was amazing.
Well, I'd like to invite Carrie to respond to this as well, Robin. But before, I want to just point out that what you've said is sort of connected to this idea of designing activities to incorporate student voice, designing the task such that students have an opportunity to design their own learning experience, be it what they're going to write about, how they're going to write it, be it a blog post or an essay or some other form of writing. all of these sort of connect back to this idea of creating a differentiated learning experience, not just in the way that we as teachers provide the content, but in the ways that students interact with the content, and then later in the ways in which students demonstrate their knowledge. We can differentiate the content, the product, or the process, and in so doing, create a more student-centered, student-led environment. And one last thing before Carrie, Edward connected very briefly to his experience in a Chinese school when he shared. And if you want to learn more about that experience, you should click on the link in the chat space where Edward wrote a blog post in which he talked a little bit about how to reduce anxiety and foster innovation in hybrid learning environments. So save that somewhere in your computer so that you can read it later. Carrie, go ahead.
No, I just my wheels are spinning listening to the panelists, and just to bring up another point related to what you're talking about for secondary back to primary. You know, when we think about listening to our students and creating project-based learning opportunities, in the younger years, you know, listening and taking anecdotal notes and to find out what the interests are can be a springboard. And an example that I have is from you know, when I was at my last school, a large population of my students were from Central America, primarily from El Salvador. And what I realized in our morning meetings when I was learning their names and they were, you know, we were learning about each other, is that they didn't know their last names. They were 5, 6 years old, but they had no idea what their last names were, the vast majority of them. So that became an area that I could develop into a project-based learning unit. And so we started to unpack, like, wow, you have 2 last names, and you know, your friend has 1, and where, you know, and started to become this whole opportunity to discover their own identity. And why do I have 2 last names? And so I pulled in, I think a really key piece for all ages is to pull in authentic texts and replace some of the texts that you have in your standard curriculum, still meeting the standards, but drawing from a text that represent our students. And so I brought in some text from an author who was El Salvadorian. I brought in our assistant principal who was also El Salvadorian. And we learned about our names in our morning meeting space, but then in literacy, we read books about it, and these books from this author. And then in math, we counted the letters in our names. We compared length, longer, shorter, because that was our standard. And then in social studies, we you know, talked about places that we were from, and so it all connected. And I was still teaching the, you know, public school curriculums, but I was integrating them across the areas, and it became students could actually learn about themselves through this content. And it was actually a really amazing amazing experience that I wanted to share.
Thank you for sharing that, Carrie. I think it's incredibly important that we engage with culturally responsive teaching in the way that you've described, in which we understand who our students are, where they're from, and select texts and activities that really respond to their backgrounds and meet them where they come into the classroom. So I'd like to just sort of switch gears a little bit and focus on the second of the 2 big topics we're going to talk about today, which is the way that we're going to connect student-driven learning to the closing of learning gaps, because that's what we're focused on this month. COVID-19 has exposed well, not exposed, I guess the right word would be, has created a challenge for us because of the toggle between in-person and online learning. There are students around the world who have lost a lot of ground, who have in some ways developed as learners, as creative problem solvers with their families, where they've learned at home and grown in incredibly powerful ways, but in other ways may need additional support. Some of the research is indicating that students are struggling with social and emotional skills as it relates to collaborating with their peers, and some of the foundational literacy and mathematical skills are sort of lacking as students come back to the classroom. Students have demonstrated that there is a learning gap. And so the question is, what are a few concrete strategies for teachers to leverage student-driven project-based learning to close those gaps and promote achievement? Some key ideas that I want us to consider are remediation, personalized learning, and differentiation. And I give that back to the panel. Darla, go ahead.
I think I'll start because I'm more general, I think, than specifically, maybe secondary versus elementary. But I think we have to start with social emotional learning. I think that's where I start when I have some of these kids coming back to the face-to-face classroom versus, the virtual classroom. And I think it's all about making sure that they're okay and really going over the norms and the procedures again as reminders because they forgot. There's something actually called re-entry anxiety that some of these kids are dealing with as they come back to face-to-face or go back and forth with hybrid or whatever it is. So even though we can trace some of the achievement back to things like systematic racism or socioeconomic status, what we're seeing now is all new. It's a combination of that, but we've lost some of these kids. Strategies that I think come to the forefront for me are personal learning, professional learning communities, talking to teachers, what's working, what's not working, how, the data, we have to start sharing the data with some of these kids and it's out there. Deepening the family connections that we can, because they suffer too. Parents went through this just as traumatic sometimes as the kids. And, setting back benchmarks, tracking those progresses. PBIS, I think, is taking on a whole new look for some teachers in some schools. I also think reflection time is important after, because these kids are coming back and the world is just crazy. Is it over my nose? Is it not? Are we wearing masks? Aren't we? Can I hug you? Do I have to stay 6 feet apart? There's so much going on. Sometimes to ask a question at the end of the day and allow them to reflect on it. And there's so many great new tools out there with the reflection piece, with the peer component piece. One of the tools that I use, it's a program called Along, and it actually it builds upon responses from the students in their reflection. They connect, they see the connections between each other. I had some of the best laid plans for some of my kids that came back to the classroom, and I didn't get started until like a week in, because we had to do a lot of this healing and reestablishing, and it was worth it. It was definitely worth it, but that's my 2 cents. I have more, but I'll allow others and jump in later.
I'll just jump in real quick. This is Courtney. I think one thing to note, and I had wanted to mention this earlier, is when we think of project-based learning, for most of us, we probably grew up in a school setting where a project was, a trifold board that we took in front of the classroom and presented, and we worked on at home, took it in front of the classroom, or a very thorough essay. And it's important to note that project-based learning skills are just that, they're skills. And there's ways that we don't have to go soup to nuts with project-based learning, so we can gauge where our students are, and maybe through a menu or voice and choice. For some reason, my students, maybe because they're high schoolers and think of food, they love this idea of a menu and different choices. And I really feel, at least in my experience through the secondary lens, they're very good at knowing what's a right fit for them. It's not like I see a student that tries to do, maybe only a paragraph, when perhaps we know that they can do like a 5-paragraph essay, or, they're not ever trying to take easy street. Like, they're very good at that point by knowing where they are, what's important to them, and offering different options, and through the lens of the project-based learning skill. So knowing that what you want them to work towards, so it doesn't have to be that full-fledged project. So project-based learning skills like real life application, any type of employability skills that we can integrate, the opportunity for them to research and critical thinking and all of that. So take that and know that we don't need a full-fledged project, and then offering them different options And I typically have, like, so I'll put the menu up and I'll see sort of what they choose and what they pick. And through my feedback or one-on-one discussions with them, start to gradually scaffold them to where either if they're below grade level, to get them to that grade level, or even my high flyers to continue to offer extension along the way. So, offering those different options, keeping in mind it doesn't always need to be a full-fledged project, and then the follow-up and constructive feedback. And I love what Robin had kind of mentioned earlier about it's not necessarily like this rush. Take your time and ensure that keeping in mind where you need them to be and focusing on a path to get them there, but it doesn't always happen, doesn't happen overnight.
Well, and I want to just clarify something that we may have missed at the onset of this discussion, which is, what do we mean when we say project-based learning? And Courtney has really connected well to this notion of real world, applicable, and personally meaningful projects. It's not about the outcome, it's about the process. And it's about the exploratory learning that takes place because of that process. I wonder, Robin, how that would manifest in your classroom or in the school that you founded.
Yeah, so we are completely online. So that's one thing that people always say, like, how can you do project-based learning online? And so we do offer choice. Our students have to go through what we call a deschooling process. So many of our students were in traditional schools before they came to the Pearl, and they were marginalized within those traditional schools. And many of our students have school trauma. And so what we're asking them now is, what are you interested in? What do you want to study? What do you want to look at? How do you learn best? And most of our students are saying, I don't even know, because they never had any of these options before. So before they can totally take control of their education and be completely self-directed, they need to kind of we have a deschooling process. They have to explore, they have to figure out what they're actually interested in. They have to try different things out. So we do a lot of options, like what Courtney said, providing those menus. And then in our school, the students make the rules and everything as well. So one of the rules is I can give them 5 options, but if they think they're terrible or not interesting, they always have the right to propose something different. And so it's that, giving them the option if they can't come up with ideas, but then also saying, if you don't like these, you can propose something else. And this gets at, like what Courtney was saying, sometimes a lot of people will go a deeper dive than what you would even have come up with if you were the only one that was, guiding, this has to be done at this time. And we also do a lot around helping the process, like what you were saying. It's a lot about the process. How do you create a project proposal? How do you come up with an idea? What do you care about? This year, we're really working on, because of the pandemic and social emotional needs and everything that everyone has experienced, we are really focused on a problem-solving curriculum. So what problems do you want to solve in the world? I'm teaching environmental science and Native American history right now. So you can imagine how heavy those topics get. So rather than only talking about all the things that are going wrong, what are the problems that you want to solve? And who are the helpers? And we look at that. And so from there, students create their project and they do things like comics, video essays, art projects. And again, this could be in one particular class. You might have an art project, a infographic, video essay, and a comic. And, it's all based on what they're doing. So they are able to demonstrate their learning in the way that they feel like they can demonstrate their learning best. And another key component is kind of the accountability partners with the class. We share, what's our project. We make sure that students have a little bit of independent work time. And that's when we do our one-on-ones. And we have them share out, like, what are your goals for this week on your independent project? What are you working so they can share with each other? And another key component, which I know a lot of people don't have the flexibility, but if you can think of ways to do this, is we do multi-age classroom. And so differentiated instruction becomes very natural within that. And then other people forget who's in which grade. And so there's not stigma around being behind or being ahead because nobody can remember which grade people are in. So you just get the support that you need based on this is what I need right now. But then there's also kind of a leveling up. So the students who have been either in self-directed learning longer, or maybe they're older, their projects have a tendency to be a little bit more complex. Not always, it's not always the older ones, but sometimes. And then they're modeling for the younger students or the students that are new to project-based learning and self-directed learning, what the possibilities are. And then they see that, no judgment, but they see these other projects, they're like, ooh, I want to do something cool like that. I want to do a video essay. I never thought of something like that. And so then everybody, we create, the last thing I'll say is I'm really focused also on a collaborative learning environment instead of a competitive learning environment. And this is something I challenge my candidates at Moreland to think about too, because everyone's like, we have to compete in the global economy. And I was like, do we? Or do we need to finally learn how to cooperate with each other? Has the pandemic maybe taught us that maybe that's really important? And that shifts it as well, because then the peer-to-peer support, helping each other out, making sure everyone in the classroom gets what they need to learn best. It's not a competition. It's we want everyone to learn more. We want everyone to understand the content instead of this competition piece. And that really changes the dynamic.
Thank you, Robin. And I want to shift over to Carrie and then to Eddie and just say really briefly, this is being recorded and will be sent to everyone here. I imagine that if you came here to learn a couple of strategies, that it was maybe like trying to get water from a fire hydrant. So do your best, but also recognize that you will get this recording to review later. Carrie, go ahead.
That's good. That's a good description. No, I just wanted to say, just going back to thinking about closing the learning gaps. And I like the way that you framed it, Joey, in an additive way, saying, because I've said this in even the last webinar, and this is kind of the quote I live by my mentor, Dr. Jose Medina, and who says, students have gifts to leverage, not gaps to fill. And that's really the truth. I mean, so I think if you're looking to do something concrete, what you do is you teach with an asset-based approach. You have to think about what the students can do, because if they're most likely dealing with having to learn at a standard that is just not where they are, and a standard that was probably created by somebody that's not an educator and maybe has not been in a classroom for 30 years or maybe never was, right? So that's so critical. And if you just think in those terms, then it's a lot easier to look at the students in front of you and get to know them, think about what they need. Replace some of your curricular materials with culturally sustaining and comprehensible texts and materials and resources and all these things. I think that's a really concrete way to think. And I think that's a way that, another thing that Dr. Medina always says is school sucked for so many kids before the pandemic, for BIPOC kids, for LGBTQ plus kids, it really sucked. And now we have an opportunity to really change things. And one of the reasons why I left the classroom was because, I could not give map testing to 5-year-olds on Zoom and then be expected to use that data to inform instruction. And so I think when, like what Darla was saying about using data, that's critically important, but it has to be authentic data. It has to be real. It cannot be these, created pieces that have nothing to do with the students truly can do. And then the last thing I want to say really quickly is another concrete strategy and a really powerful equity tool that works for every student is teaching with the anchor of content and language objectives in your lesson planning. That is something so simple that seems so hard I drill this with my candidates, it seems so hard to grasp, but it's really simple. A content objective is what the students are going to learn based on the standards, and the language objective is how they're going to acquire the content through the 4 language domains of speaking, reading, listening, and writing. And that it opens a pathway for students to learn. So those are just some of the things. I get really passionate about this subject, so as you can see.
Eddie, go ahead.
So I was just gonna, kind of to tag along with what Carrie said, I mean, I really connected with, sometimes these standards are created by people who haven't been in the classroom for ages, right? And so part of it is, making it connect to the students. So, one of my problems is, for example, when you take a look at the textbook, I get really bored with things really easy. So part of me is always trying to figure out how to take that textbook and then turn it into something that's interesting. I mean, of course, for the students, but really for me too, you know what I mean? Because I'm the one that has to watch and grade it. But like, so part of it is, tagging on to what I said before is, connecting it to what students are interested in. So for example, many of my students were interested in business. And so the textbook had a unit on, creating, like learning vocabulary and grammar through, houses and stuff like that. And so I took that and I turned it into, them becoming real estate agents, which is connected to business they're interested in. And then, them presenting and selling like a house that they could do anything with, And so in a way, it's sort of like, taking this old standard that is, was created by somebody who's been out of the classroom for a long time, and then connecting it to what they want to do. And then, in a PBL type framework. And, in terms of connecting it to online, a part of it is, it's just changing kind of like the modality. So instead of doing it in person, they may have to record a video, or they may have to, do a PowerPoint presentation and stuff like that. So, yeah, okay.
Thanks, Eddie. And I think we can also say, we could say to students, you can demonstrate your understanding, demonstrate your ability to communicate in the interpersonal modality of language on this particular content standard in whatever way you'd like, as long as you can demonstrate that modality in some way, shape, or form, and demonstrate your understanding of that concept or your ability to do that skill. And I'm being very broad, but it's connecting what Carrie has said to what Eddie has said. We are running out of time much more quickly than I would have thought possible. But I would like to invite Courtney, I believe, as the panelist who is yet to share on this second question, to sort of give us a final thought here before I wrap up our webinar.
Thanks, Joey. Appreciate that. Yeah, just to add to what's already been said, and I sort of alluded to, I think that in terms of project-based learning and closing learning gaps, I think it really goes back to basics and getting to know your students, building that rapport. And as one of our attendees had mentioned, having those discussions with them daily or as often as you see them, making meaningful connections and being aware of the curriculum or the content, your standards that you are asked to teach, and know that you're all working towards that same goal, and along the way that you're able to scaffold and offer voice and choice where applicable. And it is okay to try new things and perhaps it not be successful in your eyes, but that some of the days I've had lessons that were rough and the students loved it. It was fantastic. And as others have mentioned, from that, sometimes the students like to say, oh, you know what, we could have tried it as a Padlet. We could have tried it as a presentation or group work. And that really fosters that discussion too. And it creates tremendous buy-in when we show that we are human too. So lots of moving parts, but just keeping the word authentic. If we ourselves remain authentic, have those discussions and check-ins with the students, I feel like the elements of PBL and that authentic experience just naturally emerges and becomes organic.
Right. I always am very curious when I hear from a veteran teacher that, oh, they've been teaching this for 30 years and they do the exact same thing every year. I say to myself, 30 years ago, students were interested in doing the same thing that they are today. And I really don't think that's possible. So I want to, first of all, acknowledge and appreciate the folks who from Moreland University have made up this panel. Thank you, Dr. Edward Johns, Darla K. Hill. Thank you, Carrie Valencia, Courtney Solon, Dr. Robin Harwick. It's been wonderful having you here. I know you all are very busy teaching your modules in the Teach Now program and your master's modules in our master's program. So thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to not only be here, but to have prepared, because it is obvious that you came prepared for this discussion. And I'm in just such deep gratitude. I also would like to share with everyone that Moreland University does offer no-cost professional development, and we're going to continue this conversation, but focus a little bit more on redefining differentiation in the era of hybrid learning. As schooling moves into hybrid environments around the world, we have to find innovative ways to differentiate instruction so that we can meet the needs and the diverse ability levels of all of our students in these novel learning spaces. Practices that have worked well primarily in physical classrooms are not always going to work in virtual environments or in hybrid environments. So on November the 15th, at either 9 a.m. or 9 p.m., we will have a virtual class where we will come together with one of our faculty members. It might be one of the people who are on this panel to have an hour-long discussion. Then there will be 2 teacher-oriented, task-based activities that you can do to earn 1 continuing education unit toward your licensure renewal. This is a no-cost opportunity that is available to anybody, Moreland University graduate or someone who is entirely new to us. So I encourage you to visit the link that I have put in the chat space to learn more. We will come together in a couple of weeks to start that conversation in another Moreland Meets about differentiation. So on that page, you can learn more about that. But on behalf of Moreland University, of the more than 100 faculty members that make up our faculty and the administrators who work so hard to put together our curriculum and our platform, thank you for being here. It has been my honor as the Professional Development Officer to put this together, and I look forward to seeing you in our next event. Take good care, everybody. Bye-bye.